Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you all. Thank you for taking time today to attend our webinar, Accelerating Digital Transformation and IIoT in Pharma Manufacturing with MQTT Sparkplug, where our speakers will walk you through how MQTT can help you connect your pharma manufacturing machines. Allow me to introduce you all to our speakers for today. Ravi Subramanian, Director of Industry Solutions Manufacturing at HiveMQ, and Ryan Dusium, Solutions Engineer at HiveMQ. Very warm welcome to you, Ravi and Ryan. Before we kick off, I would like to share that we are recording this session and we will share the presentation in a follow-up email. If you have any questions during the webinar, feel free to submit them in the Q&A pod that's available in the control panel. We will answer your questions during the Q&A session, which will be after the presentation. Lastly, we will be running a poll at the end of the session. I request you all to participate and cast your votes. Now, without further ado, I will let Ravi and Ryan introduce themselves and kick off this session. Over to you, Ravi. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you so much, Jayashree. Good morning, good afternoon to all our participants. Welcome to this webinar on how HiveMQ and Industrial IoT can help with pharma manufacturing. As Jayashree mentioned, my name is Ravi Subramanian. I come with extensive product knowledge in various industry verticals. And over the past 10 years, I've been focusing on areas like industrial automation and manufacturing, in industrial IoT, and like specifically in mining and other industries, which is kind of like ripe for this. And obviously, like taking all that experience and putting them into data analytics or artificial intelligence, how you can take the data and like really apply to real world use cases. That's what I've been focused on. And I'll let Ryan introduce himself. Ryan.
Hey everybody, I'm a solutions engineer here at HiveMQ. Great to be here. My background's in software development, so I'm a software developer by trade. Life has taken me into roles as a platform product manager for cloud native applications, a lot to do with technologies like private cloud and messaging middleware in SaaS type of products. So I have a lot of exposure to the challenges with site reliability, engineering and support teams using those platforms. And so I'm bringing a lot of that experience these days into my solution engineering role here, and in talking to customers about their journey to Industry 4.0. So great to be here.
Great, thank you, Ryan. So let's kick it off here. So let's talk about the future of pharma manufacturing, right? If you look at the global pharma manufacturing market, right, it's expected to grow at a CAGR of almost like 13% by 2030 or so, to about like several $1 billion, $1,190 billion or so, right? However, despite this strong projected revenue performance, what we see is that during the same period, there can be expected to be like a decrease in overall profits, if you will, because of like mounting competition from low-cost drug manufacturers, biosimilars, and expiring patents of several blockbuster drugs. All of these factors combined with COVID has increased competition and accelerated digital transformation in pharma manufacturing, right? Pharma 4.0, which is kind of like an extension of Industry 4.0, it basically is taking that Industry 4.0 concept and applies it to life sciences in that manufacturing process. While pharma manufacturing for Pharma 4.0 mirrors Industry 4.0, there are several challenges that life science organizations face due to industry specifications, regulations that impact the adoption, right? So Pharma 4.0 is predicated on what we call industrial IoT, industrial Internet of Things, where deep data is harnessed from a myriad of sensors and devices, and they can be used to make instant and automated operational decisions to enable business intelligence at a strategic level, right? So these are some of the things that we see. However, there are challenges in the pharma industry. One of the biggest challenges that, again, because of COVID-19 and the impacts of that, where people thought that the supply chains were ironclad and it's very robust, they have realized that they are not as robust as what they thought, right? I mean, they are actually very constrained because of COVID and the ensuing demand that happened for vaccines and other drugs that came from that, right? So supply chains are constrained. So there is a need for opening out the supply chain to make it more robust, if you will. There has been additional regulatory scrutiny because of the increased production, and that obviously is something that needs to be taken care of. And again, this cost of operations have gone up because obviously there's more to be produced, and the current resources is not able to manage that, so the cost has gone up. Last but not least, the production needs to be streamlined to meet the demands. So these are some of the challenges that the pharma manufacturing is facing. And let's look at some of the goals for digital transformation, right? So when you look at the goals for digital transformation, it's really like how you can overcome this, right? So access to real-time data becomes key, right? How can I use the data and to be able to look at the operations data throughout my manufacturing process? How can I interlink the various manufacturing processes that you see within pharma, so that we can ensure that the data integrity level is high, right? How can I modularize the automation within the manufacturing plant? Now, obviously, not everything can be automated, but there are certain sections that can certainly be automated. How can I do that? And then kind of combine that with the regular operations that I do where humans are involved, right? How can I have a combination of that? How can I scale? We talked about the scaling. How can I scale the pharmaceutical production to meet the demand? And that means identifying bottlenecks in the process, improving efficiencies. We talk about batch manufacturing records, which is traditionally on paper, making that electronic, so that you can use it for quality control as well as for automating the regulatory reporting. Next slide. So when you look at digital transformation, right, in IoT, there are different aspects to that. One is the cultural aspect, which kind of includes the agility, how fast you can get. Again, this is kind of, it's more of like a shift in the psyche or in the mindset, if you will, right? Experimentation is key because not everything is going to bear results right away, right? So experimentation is key. And then the ability to iterate on something, right? And fail fast. How can I get to that lot size one where I can mass manufacture something? But to be able to do that, you need to be able to iterate, and you need to be able to fail fast. And how can I have like a DevOps for the whole thing? Now, DevOps is obviously like a software term, but how can I apply that principle within hardware and manufacturing? From a technological perspective, obviously, we talk about containerization, cloud native, which is basically how can I take my data and then modularize it, as we call it, and then how can I move my data to the cloud as necessary, right? We talk about the concepts of software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service. We'll talk more about that in some of the subsequent slides. How can technologies like big data and analytics help you take the data that you have and then apply some intelligence, artificial intelligence, to get to your end result of what you're looking for? And while doing all that, the key thing that one needs to look at is how can you make it reliable? You can make it scalable, if you will, secure. That's absolutely important. Observable, which is like as the data is flowing through your system, you should be able to observe and debug issues as it happens. And the flexibility to be able to send it to different cloud platforms, be it Azure and AWS or Google or your own cloud native applications. And from a pharma perspective, the most key thing is reliability, right? Which is how can I bring the data from my different factories, if you will, and then combine them together in one location. While doing that, how can I make the data highly available, if you will, right? So we have to look at technology that will allow us to do that. Next slide. So if we look at like a generic manufacturing plant, there's a lot of data silos. We know about that. We've talked about that many times because of the fact that over time, there's been a lot of changes that happened, and these changes were kind of like there was no strategy around these changes. They were just made because you need to have those things. So it's resulted in a lot of islands of data. And then if you can go to the next slide, talk about this spaghetti, right? This spaghetti is basically representing all of the direct connections, like the client server connections that you have, like if you look at the factory system, right? I mean, so you on one side you have the OT systems, and on the other side you have IT systems. There is a lot of mishmash of connections that need to go in. Direct connections, for example, like if an application needs to talk to a gateway, it needs to have a direct connection, or a PLC wants to talk to the SCADA system. Again, that's a direct connection. If you look at it, it's kind of like a inefficient use of the bandwidth, right? Because not every time I need to use the data. I just need to use, I need it like when I really need the data. So this mechanism really lends itself to high costs and like inefficient use of the bandwidth. If you can go to the next slide. So bringing that to like the pharma industry, right? So how can we bridge the gap between Industry 3.0, as we call it, which traditionally is your factory systems and like control systems that you have within your factories, including your SCADA system, PLCs, controllers that are used to control certain subsystems of your factory. How can you bring that to the Industry 4.0, which is basically consolidating the data, bringing it to a data center, combining that data with external systems, for example, right? Where you have a large variety of producers and consumers. We have constrained data in terms of memory and storage, because not all of these devices were created at the same time. They were brought in at different time frames. Constrained infrastructure because it wasn't like well planned out. So obviously things have been piled onto it. So that causes network congestion, hardware failures, fluctuating wireless signals, depending on what kind of machinery you have. Again, and you have to deal with a large number of devices and applications, and it continues to grow, right? And again, how can you dynamically scale across this, right? And this is where I think the next slide talks about MQTT that really helps with this. So now I'll pass it on to Ryan that will basically take us through a few slides talking about MQTT and also the technology that ensues that will help with some of these things. Go ahead, Ryan.
Thanks a lot, Ravi. So, I think that's a great kind of summary of like the challenges in pharma, as well as, some of the main kind of barriers to digital transformation. And so now we're going to look at a little bit of how you can get around those barriers and really kind of enable that digital transformation in your organization, and especially in pharma, where reliability is key. So when we're looking at what is MQTT, well, MQTT is becoming a bit of like the de facto kind of standard for connecting all of these devices and backend applications as a way for them to communicate. And the reason why is because it allows those devices to kind of and applications to decouple from each other. So when you're looking here at how MQTT works, it's all about devices publishing information to a central location, and then having other things and devices and software applications saying, I'm interested in these kinds of things. And they don't actually have to talk directly to each other. They just have to talk through a centralized MQTT broker to be able to get that information. And so, thinking back to that last slide that Ravi was showing, this really helps with that large variety of data producers and consumers, because when all of these areas of the organization are trying to work with each other, it's a lot easier to just say, go to a central place, get the information you need, and do what you need with that information. And that's a much kind of more maintainable and scalable approach. And so there's some other like great things about MQTT, like it's a very lightweight protocol. So when you're talking about constrained infrastructure, it makes it nice to be able to send something that's very lightweight across that infrastructure. So you're not taking too much bandwidth. For the devices, there's lots of kind of client support for MQTT for constrained devices that have very small, let's say, memory and storage capabilities. So, and other things like security being built on top of TCP IP, and you can use TLS. So it takes care of a lot of those kind of cross-cutting challenges. And then when you're using MQTT, you can end up getting a high-level architecture that looks like this. And so everything that we've been talking about, having all of these different systems and also different environments. coming to the same place to get their information allows you to really scale. But what kind of challenges are you going to see with this right out of the gate? Probably you're saying, hey, if everything's going to the same place, how aren't you going to see some conflicts there? Like if I'm publishing on a certain topic, isn't something else going to potentially publish on that same topic? How am I going to know what kind of data that thing is publishing? Aren't I still going to need to talk to that other group to find out, hey, what data are you publishing and how do I extract that? So even though you're using an MQTT broker, there's still a lot of kind of friction in terms of how do you scale and get these individual consumers of the information working independently of the producers. And that's a huge value add of what is a Sparkplug. And so Sparkplug is a specification. It's not a technology, it's a specification on top of that leverages the capabilities of the MQTT protocol to address the challenges that I was just talking about. So it defines, how devices should use topics. It defines how their payload data should be structured. And it also defines things like how should devices communicate how they're whether their status. So are they offline or online? Typical things in industrial IoT that would be needed in order to kind of break those barriers down in terms of the coupling between producers and consumers of information. And so really, when you use that, your interoperability and consistency and efficiency and agility are all just things that start to see dividends in those areas by using Sparkplug. And so then your architecture looks a little more like this. And thinking back again to that slide that Ravi showed earlier, are we missing anything still? So now we have Sparkplug and MQTT and an MQTT broker in the mix. So are we now protected against constrained infrastructure? Are we now really addressing the needs of constrained devices? So in that sense, no, there's still a lot to think about, and that's sort of what we wanted to show you a little bit about today. Are those other sort of things that you need to think about when setting up this kind of architecture. And a big one here is the architecture of your MQTT broker. So a few sort of aspects that are important here that you'll see on the left side of the screen that I'm going to run through. So we're taking the the HiveMQ broker as an example here. So when you set up a cluster of HiveMQ brokers to be able to kind of scale and address your scalability requirements in terms of how much processing the broker is going to need to have in order to address like all of these devices and consumers kind of coming into the same place, you might think, well, that could get kind of complicated to set up. And if it is complicated to set up, when you need to scale in the future, you're going to be kind of grinding your gears a little bit and not being able to proceed. And unless, for example, you have these aspects of the broker, such as masterless load balancing, and really that gives you the capability to deploy this cluster and have a very, very simple kind of load balancer setup that just round robins between each one of the cluster nodes, because the nodes themselves balance the data between them without having any kind of implementation from your side when you're deploying this. And this is a big aspect of reliability, is being able to easily set things up so they run reliably without having, let's say, some introducing some potential error some error conditions by having like every different deployment of HiveMQ needing that setup as well. Another big aspect here is this balancing by data and not clients. And what do I mean by that? So with some broker architectures, what you can see is that when a request goes out and arrives at a broker, it's going to start thinking about everything to do with particular clients and storing everything related to clients in that particular broker that received the request. And in a architecture like we see in IIoT, where you have so many clients and so many different topics and data variability between all of those clients, you can't rely on simply taking one dimension of the data being clients and then saying we're going to store everything related to that on one broker node, because you could quickly see kind of a big imbalance in how the cluster is handling requests, and then you can start to see failures and bottlenecks in terms of your cluster deployment. And so HiveMQ addresses this by splitting the data up. So even if you send a single message, the information about that client, the information about the topics and the payloads of the message are all going to be spread across the different nodes. This just makes the whole cluster more reliable in general. And then so finally, data persistence. So when you send information into the cluster, you want to be ensured that it's not going to get lost at some point. And really the only way to do that in the cloud and I like the saying, there is no cloud, because really at the end of the day, it's all hardware in the background. And that hardware is, likely to go down at some point. And when you talk about being able to retain data reliably, that's where you talk about needing to persist it. And this is why a big aspect of a good sort of cluster of brokers is that they are also persisting the data. And so I'm going to jump into another topic here about architecture, which is called replication. And this is about high availability as well. And I'm going to just start one aspect of the demonstration here that we're doing today. So let me just describe to you what you're seeing. So this is the HiveMQ control center. And what you're seeing in this control center is that it has 3 nodes, as you can see from these 3 different colors in this chart. And what this chart is showing you is the number of connections by cluster nodes. So how many connections are actually ending up on each one of these nodes after the cluster nodes have balanced themselves. And so I'm going to kind of throw a wrench into the mix here, and I'm going to kill one of these cluster nodes, and we're going to see how the broker kind of readjusts and rebalances to make sure that the reliability of each broker is maintained. So I'm going to do that by opening this application called Lens, which is giving you a view into what's happening on the Kubernetes cluster that's running this HiveMQ cluster. And so I'm going to take one of these nodes. So these are the HiveMQ nodes, and I'm going to just delete one of them. And you'll see what happens here is this node is terminating, and we have another node kind of refreshing to take its place. And I'm going to just describe in the slides this replication feature a little, and then come back to the demo afterwards and show you what has happened while we're talking. So, in terms of replication, what this means is, even if, like we mentioned before, that sort of session of the client and a topic and a payload are all stored on different nodes. What also the cluster is doing to ensure reliability is that it's making a backup of each one of those individual pieces of information. And it does that based on a replication factor of the cluster. So if your replication factor is 2, then there's at least at all times 2 backups of that. So if one of the nodes exits the cluster for any reason, that could be, for example, like a failure in the underlying infrastructure, or it could be a rolling upgrade that needs to take down one node in order to upgrade it. You're going to see that the cluster actually says, oh, now, and there's no central control here. the cluster itself determines one of our friends here is missing, and we need to make sure that now we're maintaining this replication state, and that we are maintaining our reliability, even though our friend has gone offline here. And so that's what the no single point of failure is. I talked a little bit about the rolling upgrades, and the rebalancing happens on the cluster. What this means is if this node here, this third node, went offline, then topic 1 backup and payload 1 would be recreated on these other 2 nodes by making copies on the 2 remaining nodes. And so a very important factor here is what I'm calling here true quality of service, meaning that as you see in this diagram, we have like a temperature sensor that's coming in on the load balancer and going out to one of these nodes. Any one of the nodes can handle that request. What's going to happen is the dispatcher on one of the nodes is going to determine where the information for that the sensor is publishing needs to be stored. And once it determines that, it's going to make sure the other cluster nodes are storing that information. Those cluster nodes are going to persist the data in persistent storage. And then at the end, the whole Hive cluster is not going to confirm to this device that it has actually received the message until all of those steps are done. So in a quality of service flow, the cluster says, okay, we received the message, and now we've actually basically stored, and we're prepared in terms of reliability. We're not going to lose that message. Here's your confirmation, and that is true quality of service. And it's what you should really be looking for when you're talking about reliability in a broker cluster. And so just quickly going back to the control center. So now what you'll see after we've killed that node, I'm going to go back to Lens. You'll see that another node has jumped up to take its place, because what we have as part of our product suite is a Kubernetes operator that configures the cluster in a way such that it's extremely resilient. So when one node goes down, another one jumps up to take its place. And what you can see here now is initially when the node went down, all the clients were kind of replicated on the client information was replicated on these 2 other nodes. And so you can see how the number of clients has kind of jumped up on those 2 nodes. And now as this third node has been added to the cluster, you can see how these connections are now balancing out to include the third node, so that now we have enhanced reliability as the cluster has grown as well.
Mm-hmm.
So so really now what we have is what we've done so far in terms of that kind of full list of things that we're trying to address to bridge that gap between Industry 3.0 and 4.0. We've addressed that large variety of consumers. We've addressed that constrained infrastructure by the reliability of the broker. But another big thing is the constrained devices. And for example, if your broker cluster goes down, you are not going to be wanting to store messages on those kind of constrained devices until the broker cluster, let's say, comes up once again. You wouldn't want to have to store in the case of, let's say, like a massive failure. Let's say your entire data center has gone down. You're not going to want to store those that data in those devices. And what's especially fragile infrastructure here could be your connection from your on-premise and your edge up into the cloud. And so if that networking connection goes down, that's another condition that could cause that to happen, where the message is back up on your constrained devices. So not only is it the architecture of the individual broker clusters, but also the system architecture and having this capability to have a broker cluster on the edge, as well as a broker cluster in the cloud, And that broker cluster on the edge can basically act as a buffer for those messages instead of relying on those devices if that kind of fragile connection, let's say, to the cloud has gone down for any particular reason. And so, so looking at all of these factors together, this is really how you bridge the gap between 3.0 and 4.0. It's more than just MQTT and Sparkplug. Looking at your broker architecture and capabilities is a very, very important factor in being able to make that transition, do that digital transformation. And so now I'm going to hand it back over to Ravi, who's going to talk a little bit more about, well, if you're doing all of this, what kind of use cases are you going to be enabling by doing that digital transformation and being able to leverage the cloud?
Thank you, Ryan. That was fantastic, right? So just wanted to reiterate, right? Some of these concepts that we talk about, like high availability through clustering, as well as the bridge extension, they're heavily used by some of our customers within pharma, right? Like Lilly, for example, is our customer that specifically wants to connect their different factories that they have in different locations, for example, and they want to kind of like ramp up slowly. So the bridge extension, for example, becomes huge for them because you want to have like data that is managed within a particular location that is centralized to that broker. And then that data needs to cut through all the networking and get out of the facility into a centralized location. So the bridge extension becomes very highly desirable in that to reduce the complexity of the networking that is needed to bring the data together. So a lot of our customers use our bridge extension, and we have other extensions also that are really highly capable. There's one other extension called this enterprise security extension. Ryan, do you want to quickly talk about that? Maybe just in a...
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I would just say one thing also about the architecture of HiveMQ and how it's related to extensions. Really nice thing about it is that every one of those broker nodes has the capability to run those extensions. And when you deploy an extension to the cluster, each one of those nodes is going to run that cluster, that extension. And so as you scale, you don't have to worry about maintaining something different. You also don't have to worry about the scalability of the processing that extension is doing, which also kind of adds to your reliability. And that was kind of just an aside there. But yes, in terms of the security extension, some great features there are being able to reach out to different authentication providers, like different identity providers, OAuth 2.0 compatible, LDAP, for example. If you have your users or your client users basically in a database, you can use that database as an authentication source of data. And then really on the other side, being able to customize, how clients can use the broker itself. So for example, if I'm this particular client, how can I say that, how can I if I'm the administrator, how can I make the broker safe, let's say, to let any one of those clients go on there and do what they need to do without, having some kind of very tight kind of process governance around that. Well, what you can do is you can say, for these particular clients that have this role, only let them publish or subscribe to this part of the topic structure, and you can even include things like properties of their client certificate as they connect to the broker, as something that you're kind of switching on to determine that device's role. Or for example, if you're using JOT, you can use JOT claims. So there's a lot of different ways, and it's very highly flexible in terms of how you can configure it.
Yeah, and the way we would like to for folks to think about these extensions are basically, if you have the Apple ecosystem, right, and then you can write different applications that sits on top of the Apple ecosystem. that takes that ecosystem to a different level, right? Where now you can actually add so much more functionality and capability using that platform that's already great. And that's what HiveMQ provides. The platform itself is fantastic, from what Ryan discussed, but this whole extensions that we provide through our SDKs, which is software development toolkits, and then the already pre-built applications, for a lack of a better word, that we offer, like the security extension or the Kafka extensions. There was actually a question on Kafka versus MQTT, right? So obviously each of this technology has a role to play. MQTT is very, very focused on IIoT. Kafka is focused on streaming analytics. But we have this extension that can take the data that we collect from your through IIoT systems, right, from your edge systems, and then we can transform that into Kafka clusters, and then we can send it to Kafka, right? So that, and Apache Kafka is a very, very like a famous and like growing technology, if you will, for streaming analytics, and we're able to plug into that ecosystem by providing the IIoT data with the reliability that we talked about, right? And then bridge it into Kafka, which a lot of our customers hugely desire. Like Confluent, for example, is the biggest Kafka provider, and that we have a kind of like a handshake with them, for example, where we can take MQTT data and send it to Kafka, right? So,
right.
Yep.
And that's really, Ravi, that's really, I guess like a salient point here is how much that kind of Kafka architecture is appropriate, let's say, for an environment like MQTT, where you have like the variability of clients and payloads and topic structure. This is the whole reason why we have an extension for Kafka, because Kafka just, the architecture of it just works better for those kind of microservice environments, for those small number of consuming applications, and as opposed to that unreliable infrastructure and network and constrained devices area of, let's say, IoT. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ryan. So I know that there's a lot of questions that are coming up, but so I'll quickly go through these two use cases, and then we can open it out to questions. All right. So this first use case basically is a pharma supply chain optimization. Now, we talked about how pharma supply chains are constrained. So one of the ways that we can help is kind of like bringing we talked about like the different processes within pharma. Like this is an example. Obviously, that's not a representation of all the pharma, but here is one representation of like some key machines within the pharma manufacturing, which we talked about Industry 3.0 and bringing the data together into a controller or PLC into a SCADA system, right? And we talked about how through MQTT Sparkplug, so we can bring that data into the HiveMQ cloud. But here is the deal, right? So we can also bring in data from external sources at a global level, at a higher level, if you will, supply chain information, sourcing information, shipping information. Combine that with your IIoT information coming from your machines, if you will, right? And then we can then enable the creation of say sourcing dashboards or production dashboards or supply chain dashboards. And these will provide the supply chain directors or the sourcing people a complete view of your supply chain, right? As opposed to having a view only on your localized supply chain, now it will bring it at a global level. So if there is an issue that is potentially waiting to happen, for example, right, there will be some like alerts and alarms and triggers that will go out that will enable them to make a decision, so that that supply chain is not constrained, right? If there is a demand that is waiting to happen, you can kind of plan for that ahead of time. So that's one use case. And then from our perspective, again, reliability is huge because you're bringing data from different locations, and these need to be highly available, because if you're making a decision based on the data, that data needs to be highly available, right? So that's one thing that we provide. And the observability, right? Because we have all these different hops. What if some data is lost, right? What if something is an issue? So we again provide you with the dashboards that Ryan demonstrated that will basically allow you to kind of like monitor. The control center will basically monitor that and provide you with more information. Recently, we launched as a part of our latest 4.9 launch, as a part of the control system, we we did distributed tracing, which basically provides you a little bit more information, and it allows you to kind of like take all the data coming from your different sources and then plug it into like third-party systems like Datadog and others. That will give you even more context around where the data is coming from, especially if something is a problem. You can easily debug it and figure out what the source of your problem is, right? Where the data is not coming. So that's one. And then the second one is regulatory reporting, right? Where, again, because of COVID and because of the increased demand, there is a lot of focus on regulatory, right? There's a lot of enforcement that's happening even more on pharma manufacturing specifically, right? So, again, the industry will be challenged as you kind of like go into as you keep like manufacturing more. And again, having that ability to do regulatory compliance in a more automated fashion is key. Batch data records, which maintains all of the manufacturing steps, are kind of like, what we see typically manual. And I know some have moved to more digital, but that's not like at a global level, right? It's still kind of localized. So there is a need to digitize them. And these manufacturing batch records obviously will help with automating the regulatory reporting, but it also helps with quality control, right? If there is recalls and things like that, it can help you figure it out. So again, in this use case, we are able to bring in all the batch record data, combine that with your machine data, and provide some view that will allow you to make these decisions or like be able to do these reports automatically, if you will, right? And again, the key thing here is the reliability that we provide through the highly available functionality, as well as the security, right? Because when we are talking about batch data records, security is key. And so we provide, I think, Ryan, you already touched upon a lot of the security methods that we provide, like TLS, SSL, OAuth, X5.9 certificates, and also the enterprise, the security extension, where you can actually, your IT team can basically deploy the same security protocols that you have on your regular IT systems on the broker. So that basically creates that pass-through. So be it LDAP or be it Active Directory, whatever it is, we can do all that. So that is that. Let me see. I think that's pretty much it, right? And then we had some. If we can go to and these are just next steps and some resources that we have. We have a nice pharma solution page, as well as we have like a white paper that you can access. So please access those things. And obviously, we are the experts in MQTT, so we have the Essentials ebook as well as Sparkplug Essentials, which will be really useful as you kind of like look to learn more information about this. So Jayashree, at this point, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you so much, Ravi and Ryan. That was a fantastic presentation. I'm sure our participants found the content really useful. Like Ravi pointed out, I have shared the link to the pharma white paper in the chat section. I request you all to check it out. The use cases which Ravi and Ryan covered during this presentation is also covered in the same white paper. So you'll get more information over there. So let's move on to the Q&A. There are lots of questions coming in, lots of interesting questions coming in. So I will start taking questions one by one. Ravi and Ryan, you guys can help us out here. So Arif is asking, how can we integrate, publish, subscribe, and named data networking rather than TCP/IP?
Ryan, do you know about named data networking?
I'm actually not sure what is meant by this as opposed to TCP/IP. But yeah, maybe we can move to the next question, and maybe if Arif, maybe you can kind of add some more detail there on named networking and.
I guess Arif is not in the session right now.
Okay, no issues.
Yeah.
Actually, I did notice a follow-up question also, whether there is a data broker actually needed to do publish subscribe. So there were two questions that he had posted. For some reason, I don't see the second question.
Yeah,
so,
I answered one in the chat.
Oh, you did. Okay, so, you answered that.
Yes.
Okay, great, great. So I think we are not 100% sure about this named data network is specifically, and we don't want to misspeak. So why don't we take this back to our team, and then we can provide a answer to this, right? In hopefully this week we can provide an answer to that.
Good. Thank you so much. I'll move on to the next question. Igor is asking, can MQTT broker or Sparkplug be used with transactional data as a data pipeline between different higher level systems like MES, EQMS, or LIMS?
Well, yeah, what I would say to answer that is absolutely, because a lot of these systems do speak Sparkplug as well. That's one of the big benefits of Sparkplug, is that it's a kind of a very widely adopted format, and it continues to grow in that sense. A lot of kind of vendors are consolidating on that format. And so I'd say yes. It depends what you mean by transactional, but in general, yes, that's true.
Yeah, if I can just add to that, right? So I think it's just like, can I send data to my, and this is, maybe I'm trivializing it, but can I send data, say, from a machine, right? Like something on the OT system, and share that with like an MES system or a database? Or can I send data between like two different databases or two different MES systems, if you will, like through the broker? The answer is absolutely right. Like Ryan mentioned, we can do that. So we consider all of these different elements as clients, MQTT clients, right? So as long as they are able to present data in the MQTT format, if you will, we can absolutely do that. The other way we can bridge the data between our system and a third-party system is through the extension that we talked about, right? So we have specific extension from MQTT to Kafka to kind of address that specifically, where we're able to transform the data and send it. There is actually an extension that we have for some databases, Influx, for example. Influx database recently have a client capability, meaning like they are able to present data through an MQTT client that they've incorporated, right? Which is less common on the IT side of things, more common on the OT. For example, PLC manufacturers, gateway providers have a client that is already available for MQTT that can easily present the data in that format. In Sparkplug world, it's called edge of the network node, so that your individual sensors and other data points or other machines don't need to know MQTT, right? All it needs to do is present the data to the centralized gateway, for example. And that gateway is what was called an edge of network node, which will present the data in the MQTT format to a broker, right? So that's kind of like, we have partnership with companies like Opto22, for example, which is an edge of network node and a gateway manufacturer that has the ability to talk MQTT Sparkplug, but at the same time, it can talk to different systems on your OT side, like through Modbus or other formats, if you will. So.
Cool. Thanks, Ravi. Thanks, Ryan. I'll move on to the next question. There are a couple of questions from Amado. So Amado is asking, are PLCs having embedded MQTT or MQTT clients is implemented in the edge router?
Yeah. I just addressed that. We just talked about that, right? So more and more PLC manufacturers are doing that, right? Either directly, or they have partnership with like providers, or they have an open source version of an MQTT client that you can install on top of the PLC through some standards.
Yeah, right. And not only just MQTT compatibility, but also Sparkplug, which is
yes.
great. Yeah.
I think Amado had the follow-up questions, which also was answered a short while ago. I will move on to the next question. Vikram is asking, is the buffer size on edge configurable?
Yeah, it's configurable if what you're talking about is where you had like the two brokers set up in a system architecture and connected by the bridge extension. Absolutely, it is configurable, just in terms of how much storage space that you give to the broker. And then essentially the feature of MQTT that's used in that respect is called persistent sessions. And so when a session drops, being any client. It could be that the other broker is essentially a client of that broker, and when that connection drops, that is where the broker starts to queue the messages for that client that it would want to receive when it reconnects after the network connection is reestablished. And you can simply increase that queue size, and queues are dynamic in MQTT. You don't have to allocate a queue specifically. This is a huge aspect of like an MQTT broker, like a true MQTT broker, is that you don't need to do configuration to add queues. You just have to enable this from the client perspective, with the client saying that they want a persistent session. So it's very nice for increasing that agility between the producers and consumers in that respect. And like I said, it's just about increasing your storage space on the broker.
Thanks, Ryan. There's one interesting question in the chat. Bert is asking, when considering an implementation with the segmented edge for OT, business middle layer and cloud integration, what is a typical HiveMQ architecture? It's in the chat, not in the Q&A.
Oh, okay.
Do you want me to repeat the question?
Please. Yeah, go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. So the question is, when considering an implementation with a segmented edge for OT, like business middle layer and cloud integration, what is a typical HiveMQ architecture?
Okay. Yeah, that's exactly what we were just talking about, which was, we probably just answered that question, I think, in our answer to the last question, which is really that, two broker clusters connected by the bridge extension.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
There's a follow-up question too on the chat itself, on the hardware requirements for a typical MQTT broker setup. We should be able to share some documentation on this, right?
Yeah, we have our system requirements in our help, so we can share that link for that question. Yeah.
We'll share that link in the follow-up email.
Sure.
Cool. Let me move on to the next question. Is it possible to implement a Sparkplug compliant device with full LWT and debirth and dedeath? Ryan, Ravi?
I'm sorry, where did you see that question?
It's in the Q&A.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Is it possible to influence Sparkplug compliant device? LWT, debirth, and dedeath. Yes. Sparkplug compliant devices do implement those aspects of the Sparkplug protocol.
To me, it comes with Sparkplug, right? If you are fully compliant with Sparkplug, all of these feature functionalities will come as a part of that. So by saying that we are Sparkplug compliant, we are saying that we are compliant with all of the Sparkplug features. Whatever the Eclipse Foundation has put out in the latest specification, we support that.
Yeah, and what's really nice about that specification is it does take into account those kind of gateway devices that are taking in connections from several other devices on the edge, with exactly what you're talking about there, which is the device birth and death versus the edge of network node.
Thank you so much, Ryan. I guess the other follow-up questions were already answered. So, for example, how your cluster dealing with when the connection is lost. So this question was already answered. I found one more interesting question. How does HiveMQ Enterprise Broker differentiate from open source MQTT brokers from the perspective of enabling pharma with IIoT goals.
Right. Well, when you're talking about open source brokers, you're typically talking about different types of architectures to the one that we described today. And what you have to look for in that respect are things like, do you have to create, for example, a queue every time you want to queue messages? So the MQTT standard, it doesn't kind of dictate to the broker how those things need to get implemented. So even if you're talking about publishing and subscribing on a particular topic, and when you're doing so, supporting things like persistent sessions and quality of service flows, when you're talking about some other brokers, you could have situations where you need a lot more maintenance in terms of the deployment and configuration of the broker, like we were talking about, for example, how the load balancer works in a cluster scenario. But also what we were just talking about there in terms of creating queues and needing to maintain internal state of the broker, as opposed to using a broker that's designed at the outset, when deployed, when easily configured, to handle IoT type scenarios where you literally have thousands of devices publishing on different topics and with different payload sizes and variability. And that's really, I think, the key and what we wanted to kind of get across as a main point in this particular webinar was that reliability which is extremely important for pharma, is a lot more than just implementing an MQTT broker with MQTT and Sparkplug. Has a lot to do with the architecture, and those are some of the key differences.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Ryan. Ravi, do you want to add?
No, I think we're good. There was, looks like somebody has their hand up. I don't know if I'm just seeing things, or there seems to be one person. Yes, Ihab. Maybe do we want to have him just join us and ask the question live, if that's okay? Or
I see that probably has dropped off now.
Dropped. Okay.
Yeah, I don't see him. Yeah.
Maybe we can do this, right? I don't know. It's only 3 minutes, but if we can take maybe a couple minutes, if somebody wants to ask a question live, if they want to just mention it in the chat, we can bring them in and then have the question asked. I know that we have a lot more questions we have to get through, but we obviously wouldn't be able to in the 3 minutes. We'll certainly get back to them, right? We'll kind of like have a Q&A.
Probably we can take one question from Tim. Any recommendations on managing or supporting validation and GMP compliance? IQ, OQ, PQ testing? Any current lessons learned from industry? I'll just check if Tim is on the session, then maybe I can unmute him.
Okay. Ryan, are you familiar with GMP compliance, or?
No, I'm not familiar.
Yeah, and I know that we have articles that we put out on like all the validations that we do, right, in terms of and the best practices around these validations. But obviously there are industry specific things that we also need to validate, right? So as we kind of like work more with pharma and other specific industries, we kind of like try to ensure that we are in compliance with some of the regulatory needs or compliance needs with those industries as well. But I can work with you, Jayashree, and we can share that that there is a blog that was written by our team on what they go through, right? In fact, I would also say one of the things that we used internally was basically some of the tools actually we have exposed to external customers. Swarm, for example, is a tool that I remember where we were using that to simulate how much load that we can put in the system. Our customers loved it so much that we are now giving it to them as well, because they also want to use that. So a lot of our internal testing best practices are now used by our customers. because they love it.
And some of the great things that can be, leveraged in terms of testing and staging environments, as you brought up, Ravi. Are things like the Kubernetes operator, because that operator takes care of a lot of coordination in the broker cluster for you. So it's a lot easier if you're setting up something like a deployment pipeline where you want to go through your development and testing and staging phases before you get to production. The broker makes it quite easy to do that, and especially the Kubernetes operator, in terms of how it allows you to inject configuration into the cluster. It really kind of lowers the overhead of maintaining those kinds of pipelines, and also just storing those pipelines in code so that you can do things like Git operations and drive your pipelines from Git code storage and version control.
Thank you so much, Ryan. So we are really at the top of the hour, and so thanks everyone for attending. It's been really great. And thanks, Ravi and Ryan, again for a fantastic presentation. Like I said during the start of the session, we have been recording it, and we will share the recording as well as the slide presentations in a follow-up email. We will also share the useful links which we have been sharing in the chat section, also the ones which Ravi and Ryan mentioned. So
Awesome.
See you all next time. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
See you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.